Welcome everyone to our presentation on Life Beyond Scotch, 5 ways to support your scun after leaving Scotch. My name is Teddy Webster and I'm the president of the Young Old Boys, known as YOBs, which is part of the Old Scotch Collegians Association, known as OSCA. I'm also a uni student. Now, OSCA provides alumni with reasons and ways to connect through clubs and societies, events and mentoring. The YOBs have a specific focus on helping boys who are 0 to 10 years out of school. These opportunities are highly valuable and are important to encourage your son to engage with as they leave Scotch. We don't provide a counselling service, but the connection we do provide can be invaluable. The purpose of tonight is to discuss how we can best support the boys as they transition through a very tumultuous period of their life. We've conducted research into the experience of boys after leaving school, and we recognise that there is a significant challenge as they move from their highly structured lives at Scotch into the diversity of the world beyond. There are many different paths that the boys may follow, be it university, apprenticeships, jobs, gap years. It is as varied as the boys are themselves. However, there is a similarity in the challenges that the boys face with managing their time, their lives, and their futures. Boys will no longer have the same relationships or structures that they had through their 12 to 13 years of schooling. University can be a particularly challenging time for boys. Across Australia, 1 in 5 of students stop studying in their first year at uni. Of this, 13,000 students change courses or institutions, and 27,000 stop altogether. Leaving school can be hard, so tonight we are providing you with some tips on how to help your boys in their new lives. With me tonight is James Lamont, and Nick Clark. Now I'm going to jump to Nick first. Nick is the Scotch Psychologist and is going to provide 3 tips on how to help your son's mindset. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Teddy. I guess the 3 tips that we had in mind and discussed beforehand. The first one is to help keep in the front of your son's mind that it is a period of transition, that life is not going to be like this forever, and that it is a difficult time, transitioning from high school into, as you said, like the diversity and the complexity of the real world. So holding on to that sort of hope, if you will, that things are not going to be as difficult as they are when you're first sort of year or 2 after high school. The second thing we talked about was supporting your son and encouraging your son to achieve a healthy balance in his life with socialising with friends, having a job, doing some study, exercising, getting enough sleep, playing sport, all the sorts of things that can help him sort of find his energy and a healthy balance, as we say. And the third one was the value of sort of like a growth mindset, that be careful around our language, that things are not a failure. It's more about what can we learn from this setback, how have you grown stronger, what sort of skills have you acquired that you can transfer into the next challenge. And so I think they're the kinds of things that can help your son in this time.
Great, thanks for that, Nick. And hopefully that provided some really helpful advice on how to best engage with your boys. I'd like to switch over to Jum now. Jum is an old boy and a senior partner with Fusion Graduate Consultancy. Jum's going to provide some key tips on helping your sons engage with tertiary study and the development of key skills for their employment. Welcome, Jum.
Thanks, Teddy, and great to be here, and thank you for joining us tonight. I think as sort of Nick and Teddy have pointed out, that it is a really difficult time for some young men as they're sort of entering that world after school and that transition period. So trying to support them and give them the strategies that are going to support them is really important. So when we talk about some of these skills that employers are looking for, especially going through part-time jobs or into graduate roles, once they do reach that time, whether it is after their university studies, we're calling them transferable skills because they're more than just soft skills that I'm sure many people have heard the term for before. And we're talking about the top kind of skills that employers are looking for in our young talent that's coming through is definitely around communication. It's definitely around leadership, teamwork and collaboration. It's around resilience and all of these kind of skills that are going to set them up to be successful in their roles, not just as young people, but further on in their careers as well. But how do we start to show and build these skills, I guess, is the important part. And we talk about employers looking fondly on having some of these skills, but they want them to have a wide experience as well. So thinking about how can we get our young men involved in part-time work, volunteering, sporting teams, all these different life experiences that are going to give them that well-rounded experience that they can take to the workplace as well. But finding what they're passionate about and using that. It doesn't necessarily need to be work experience in a field that they're going to later, because these are the skills we're calling those transferable skills that will give them success across the board.
Great, thanks for that, John. And hopefully that provided some really great tips to help support the boys for the next stage in their life. Now, we're going to open up for a Q&A. And we've received a lot of questions already, so we've tried to group them into some key themes for a bit of clarity. We'll also try to get to some questions as they come in. I'm going to jump over to you, Nick. And one of the prevailing themes that we've got is surrounding mental health and well-being. And a lot of parents are really keen to understand how boys can best achieve a balance in their life between uni, social lives, work, etc. What are the best ways to do that?
It is. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're all sort of striving for. And I think one of the difficulties for parents is that the nature of your relationship with your son necessarily changes. You sort of have less say over their lives. Like, obviously, when children are younger, we decide what school they're going to. We decide what they're going to have for dinner. But all of that changes. And I think what I see a bit of is parents still trying to hold on to the idea that they can manage their child's life, because ultimately they are still your child. But 9 times out of 10, that sort of ends badly, even though it's coming from a good place, that you want to protect your child and guide them in directions that are best. Often the young person, the school leaver, if you like, experiences that as you trying to control their lives and not understanding, and that can really sort of damage your relationship with your son. So I think it's really important that you try to preserve the relationship you have with them, to try to understand what they're experiencing. So sort of ask them, like, what is it that you're angry about or worried about or concerned about? And then sort of sit with that and accept that it is a difficult time and that there are things that do warrant worrying about. So you sort of sit with those worries, but at the same time, there is a way forward. Not all is lost. Jum, you made that point about passions. If volunteer work, umpiring, sport, there's all sorts of things. I think the key to ultimately getting to the balance is that they've got to get out there and do something. And wherever you can find a little bit of traction, work experience with their uncle or their aunt, or going interstate to stay with family, anything that can kind of get them moving again, I think can be really useful.
And from that, there seems to be a key idea that structure is a really important part of young men's lives as they transition. Have either of you got any tips on how they can best form that structure? I know you suggested ways of sort of connecting with pathways for work and family. Are there any sort of other key steps that they can take to really find structure in their daily lives?
Well, I think it's a lot around that self-awareness piece to find that balance in the first place, and understanding, well, how do I as an individual, how do your boys, and getting them to think about it, well, how do I actually recover my energy to make sure that I show up and be my best self every day? What's my attitude? What's my energy? If it is, I love being surrounded by people, that's how I regain my energy. That's going to be great for some people, whereas some might need to just have some quiet time and recover their energy, and trying to put those structures in place daily so you can show up and be your best self. you can look at it across a range of different ways to recover your energy, whether it be your health and fitness, whether it be your mental health, whether it be your faith and your values around volunteering and things like that. So it's about what works for them, and that's going to be different for everybody. I think is something to a starting place at least to think about, putting those structures in place each and every day.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about identifying for your son what energises them, and as you say, sort of, because it is different, and often it will be different to them. Some people are energised by being around lots of people. For other people, that's awful. They want to spend some time by themselves. The other thing that came to mind when you were speaking, Teddy, was employment. Because I think even from myself, knowing that I had to get to work at a particular time forced me to have a little bit of structure around the rest of my day. I had to go to bed because I've got work in the morning, so sometimes even just a part-time job can sort of inject enough structure into their life that they can structure some other things around that.
Yeah, fantastic.
I think over the last couple of years, it's probably that structure's been lost in a lot of young people's lives.
Yeah.
So how can you start to build that at home as well? And if it is, getting them involved in doing jobs around the house, or whether it's everyone takes a meal and cooks that one night a week, that gives them some structure to that day, and they can have to go to the supermarket, they have to cook that meal for the family, and getting everyone in the household involved with that will start to build some of that structure that may be required.
Yeah. And so pulling out this concept of some people would like to engage with others socially to gain energy, essentially. With that, there becomes new risks associated with adult life. Alcohol, drugs, parties, driving, things like that. These young men are now faced with a lot of risks. Are risks good? Are they bad? And sort of how can you help kids navigate their way through these challenges?
I mean, that's a really difficult thing, and as a parent myself, I'm worried about those years when my children finish school and, as you say, are driving cars and out in the city. I think it's important that you let your children know that you are worried about those things and encourage them to drive carefully and those things without overdoing it. I think drugs is a big one as well for young people in recent years. I reckon where possible have conversations about that sort of stuff. Sometimes a starting point can be, asking your son if they can identify any sort of happy, well-adjusted person who uses these recreational drugs, and they can't. And to keep telling them, it's coming from a place of concern, But certainly having conversations about what their friends are doing, which ultimately is what they're doing as well, is a good way to just explore the risks and make sure that they can try to at least hear the things that parents are concerned about. But that's a really tricky space as well.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would say, Teddy, is for parents to speak to other parents, because I feel like all parents are worried about those things, and some parents will be finding things that are working, and if we can share that kind of knowledge, that's very helpful.
And we seem to have touched on this concept that socialising isn't necessarily a universal experience. Some people socialise in very different ways. And one of the interesting questions we had is around gaming and their sons socialising through gaming. Is that a productive way for kids to be energising and sort of becoming their best, most social self? Or are there sort of other healthy behaviours that we could incorporate as well?
Yeah, I'll see what you think as well, Jum. But ultimately, I don't want gaming to be conceived of as an evil thing. There is a place for it in the lives of these young people at the moment. But certainly, it's not the only way to socialise. And I think John was talking about these transferable skills, and a lot of those skills really need to be learned in real life interactions. So I think that gaming has its place, video games and socialising online but it really can't be the only way that that your son is interacting with the outside world.
Fantastic.
I think over the many years, the digital world has sort of taken over, and the phone's become an extension of the hand to an extent, and young people can game all day and chat in chat rooms and get their food delivered to their door through an app, and suddenly they haven't actually interacted with anyone because they've done it all virtually. So the virtual world has brought with it unprecedented opportunity, but it's also brought some concerns around developing some of these crucial skills that are not just employability skills, but these are skills and that young people need for life, because they need to have the ability to share how they're feeling, to communicate with someone, to have a conversation, to be vulnerable, to understand what these emotions mean to them, and be self-aware around it. So I think there is a balance, and if we can encourage this, bring back talking around the dinner table and starting to have some of these conversations, it's going to be beneficial for them to a degree.
Fantastic. And, building upon that, where there's a sort of a balance that needs to be achieved between that complete independence and, that sort of total isolation in one's bedroom. That's clearly been something that's been challenging throughout, the past couple of years with COVID lockdowns. But, what is the right balance? Like, where do we find it between, half your day in your room and half day outside? Like, what's the limit? Is there any sort of strict guideline, or is it, more of an ad hoc scenario?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question as well, because like we've said for a few things, I think it'll be different for different people. I think what I would be looking for is your son's capacity to function, So if he seems to be spending a lot of time in his room, but he is getting to work on time, he is going to university classes if that's what's happening, or catching up with friends on occasion, playing sport, I think then, even if he's spending a bit more time in the virtual world than you would like, if he's functioning, I think that's okay. But if your son is not going to the parties that he's invited to, he's lost his job because he missed too many shifts, not really able to function in the real world, then that's the sort of the red flag, I guess.
Yeah. And one of the difficult scenarios that some students face is particularly with boarders, and their social life drastically changes after school. Obviously they leave the confines of Hawthorn, where they've built these relationships over many years. How can boarders best connect with each other, or reconnect with their environments back at home, or the boys from school? What's the best way for boarders to engage with other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. There was a couple of questions from boarding families, and it is something that we're talking about, like organising things in particular for boys who were living in the boarding school, because it is a very different kind of transition for them, a much bigger life change. But I was going to say, when I saw that question, Teddy, some of the things that Oscar has, some of the clubs and societies and opportunities to connect with other people through Oscar. So maybe I'll throw it back to you.
Well, on the note of Oscar's clubs and societies, we have nearly 30 clubs and societies across a really broad range of areas. That could be the footy club, the cricket club, over to the music and drama clubs, the food and wine club, there's a bushwalking club, there's basically anything. You poke a stick at it, you'll find something. And then that's not all just located exactly within Melbourne. One of the things we have coming up soon is the Canberra branch event. So, a lot of students often go to ANU, for example, and, the bookings for that are now becoming open. And, for anyone based in Canberra, there's a great way to connect. We also run events in Sydney and internationally. We have a very broad scope. So this isn't just for people in Melbourne. Like, we like to really open up and engage with people, with Scotch people all across the world. So we try and remain really, really diverse.
I might just jump in there, Teddy, because I was a boarder many moons ago. So I'll touch on that, but also on the Oscar things, I went to one in London. So that they are literally all over the world when I was living over there. So But just back to the boarding question and supporting those boarders, it can be difficult because they're going from a life where there's so much structure and they're living with their mates and 24/7 they're surrounded by people and their friends. So it can be difficult. I think one of the benefits here is the virtual, the social media aspect of it and staying connected through that, especially when they move maybe back interstate, whether it be farming families or whether it be international students as well. But also, I think it's here about making a real conscious effort now that they're out of that school structure and making the effort to call, to email, to text, whatever it might be, because it becomes on that individual to drive that relationship. Like any of us as adults, we understand that for a relationship to work, effort's got to be put into it, and it has to be conscious effort. And maybe even starting to talk about reciprocity with them to say that you can do it. Always think about, well, what can you give to that relationship rather than what you can take from it as well. So making it a conscious effort for them and explaining that to them, that's how the relationship's going to blossom.
Fantastic. So clearly it's emerged that our boys are different, and we need to apply sort of varied methods for what we're going to do with them. But Oscar is providing, as much as we can to help boys stay connected. And the services are there, and we really encourage you to encourage your boys to engage with what we can provide. But I'd like now to sort of transition to a slightly different key area, and that is the actual process of transitioning from school into the real world, let's call it. And that transition can be very varied. We're not just saying that boys are going straight into universities. Like, boys follow a lot of different paths. But Trum, do you have any advice on how boys can crystallise their future directions? It's very hard for an 18-year-old to see what they want to be doing over the next 50 years. But how can they start to get some ideas?
Well, I think firstly, a career is a very long time. I think that was some of the advice early in my career, that you've got to find something that you're really passionate and motivated by. And if you're not enjoying it, then it's okay to stop and start again, especially when you're sort of early. I think, Teddy, you can probably talk to changing university choices and moving around that. So it's a matter of explaining to our young people that mistakes are okay, that these are, if we go back to our growth mindset, that mistakes are going to happen, but it's what you learn from it and what we can take away from that to move forward. But I would encourage young people to get as much varied experience as possible. Sink their teeth into things that they don't know about, because young people don't know what they don't know. So until they give it a go, until they try out something, they might find that they really love it, or they might find that it actually isn't for them. So give them that opportunity to go and work in a bar or a pub, or go and work in the accounting firm, or whatever that is, until they can really understand, well, what are they motivated by? What do they want to get out of a career? What do they want out of their study? To really sort of cement their thinking, because as soon as they're out into the real world, it's up to them to drive that. And I think, it's important for them to get a varied experience.
Absolutely. And you actually, funnily enough, touched on my own experience there. And for some context, I graduated Scotch in 2017. And all through year 12, it's such a chaotic experience, obviously. Your VCE studies, your social life, sporting life, it's a very busy time. I never took a moment to think about what I'm doing the year after. All my focus was on, SACs and exams and everything else that occupies your life. I had no vision of what I was going to do next. So I went to university and I just started doing something because, I should, that's what people do. And I had absolutely no real direction. So I was doing uni and I hated it. I absolutely hated what I was doing. I was disengaged from uni, and that probably affected my mental health a little bit. And I was feeling a little bit despondent about what my future was going to look like. But after some time, I decided to sit down with some, I suppose, mentors or people that I sort of looked up to and could trust in my life. And we had a discussion, as you've just mentioned, about finding your passions. And we sat down and I wrote out what I'm passionate about, and then we found alignment with what I wanted to do. And now that I've switched into a different course, I'm so much happier, and I'm really thriving in that course, and that sort of set a better way to pursue my passions and find some real purpose in what I want to do in my life. So from my own personal experience, it's not a bad thing for kids to change around and try it out. That's really what university is. Hence courses often being so broad.
I think on that as well, employers are putting less and less sort of emphasis on what your degree type is, because more and more employers are saying we can teach technical skill, but we want them to come in with a base transferable skills that are going to benefit us as an organisation. So don't be so worried about those degree types maybe early on in the uni experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. And staying on the uni theme, what if a boy decides to defer their studies? Is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing? Where are we at?
I think it's a good thing. I deferred my studies straight out of school. And I think if you can take lessons from it and start to articulate your experiences and what you've gained from that, and whether it be part-time work, whether it be volunteering, whether it be traveling, there is lessons to take, and if you can articulate those to the skills that you built experiencing that, then that's going to be beneficial down the track as well.
Absolutely.
So what do we say though? We're not encouraging defer to do nothing.
No.
But defer and do something.
Yeah.
Green light. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I'd like to come back to this idea of, deferring sort of with a purpose, and the concept of passion and finding what you really want to do in your life. That's a very hard thing for an 18-year-old to figure out. Is there any tips as to how you can find what you really care about? Have you got any strategies as a way that a kid can sort of find their next steps?
Well, I think I was thinking about my experience at university, and I did my dip ed for other reasons, not to become a teacher. But it wasn't until I did a teaching round in a particular school that I thought, oh, hang on, this could be good. So I think, like Jum said earlier, I reckon the key is to trying lots of things and being open to opportunities that might present themselves. Just having that sort of self-awareness that there will be things that you will enjoy doing and that will energise you and won't be just like a chore. And it doesn't really matter how long it takes you to find that. It's out there. Try different things. Think back to what was your favourite subject at school. And sooner or later something will sort of be enjoyable, and then you can sort of pursue that, see where it takes you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think we talked about that quote earlier that we had where we said when at 18 we asked our young people to make huge career choices, when only a couple of months ago they were having to ask if they could go to the bathroom. So just giving them that time to explore this and understand that transition period as well.
Yeah, and I think, like you were saying, careers are different now. It's not so much about a career, like I'm going to be in this career for the rest of my life. Have the knowledge that you will try lots of different jobs or different training courses, and that's okay. That's almost the norm now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess looking at my own experience, a way that I drew upon figuring out my path was using mentors, and not expecting that every 17, 18-year-old kid leaving school is going to have a whole big group of mentors that they can rely on. But they are a really important source to connect with. And one of the great benefits as to what Oscar can do is our website called Oscar Connect. And what that provides is a distinct database full of mentors and alumni across multiple year groups, and they're available there for boys to reach out and ask for advice or ask for a coffee, ask to hang out. And that's a really structured way for boys to look for mentors and a way they can connect with the Oscar alumni community, which is clearly one of the strengths that Scotch likes to bring to the table. and something that I tapped into myself. And it's certainly a very useful resource for the boys to use, and I can't encourage that any further.
100%. I think Oscar Connect is a terrific resource. The thing I wanted to say as well is, especially for boys who were in school last year, if they did have a favourite teacher or their head of house, or I think it's not too late to reach out to that teacher that you enjoyed their lessons, or because these people can be like a mentor as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's all about widening the support network for our young people. So our kids are only going to tell us what we want to hear, because they don't want to hurt us. They're going to keep things from you. So I would encourage you to sit down with your boys and get them to identify 4 or 5 trusted sources that they would be happy talking about, and then exploring them as becoming sounding boards for your son. Someone that they can have conversations with, can be a little bit vulnerable, can discuss big life decisions with, because they might not want to sort of have these conversations with you because they are worried about upsetting you, or they are worried about the confrontation that comes with some of the conversations.
Yeah, and that's very normal too. I mean, as you say, all of us withheld stuff from our parents and were concerned about upsetting them or getting into another argument, and that's not a sign of sort of family dysfunction. That's age appropriate.
And I think if we can get them to identify those trusted sources rather than you as a parent doing it, it's going to feel like they're a little bit more in control of it.
100%, yeah.
And I find that topic of engaging with those trusted sources really interesting. And one of the experiences that I've had with my social group over the past couple of years is that increasing ability to become vulnerable with your friends. And my sort of close group of about 10 or so friends, we're all sitting down one night having a chat, and one of them opened up that they were not feeling so great about their life. And that was quite a big dynamic shift for a group of sort of young men who would never dare to talk about their feelings. So all of a sudden switching and somebody actually having that courage to be vulnerable. And from there, that person was able to get a lot of support from their friends. No one sort of threw them away saying, "Ooh, emotions." It was like, "Oh, hey, we all have these similar feelings," and that vulnerability, displayed a lot of strength, and it really helped our friend group all sort of strengthen each other and become sort of more rounded and connected people.
And I think parents can role model that vulnerability and talk about their own experiences and times of uncertainty or hardship that they've sort of endured as well, because it's part of the deal.
Yeah, taking the lead on that vulnerability, I think, is really important to show that you are human, that things do impact you, that you do have emotion, because it makes it real. And as you said, if we can showcase this behaviour, vulnerability is an absolute superpower. And I'm a big advocate for if we can be vulnerable and show others how we are feeling, it's going to help a lot. One thing I know when we did discuss this last year, Nick, was we talked about side-by-side conversations. And I know for a lot this actually hit home because young men especially prefer to have side-by-side conversations rather than eye to eye. They much rather that when it might be confronting for them, when it might be emotional, when they might need to show some vulnerability, because they feel much safer side by side.
So you mean like side by side, sitting in a car, or doing something together on a walk, at the footy, watching the footy or something. They can be side by side. It's much easier to have those conversations, and I'd encourage you to try and do that with your son, because it sort of creates that psychological safety for them, which is really, really important for them to feel comfortable and open up and talk about some of the issues that they might be having. Face-to-face makes it much more sort of a competitive stance sort of thing, and can make them feel much more anxious and things.
And clearly this sort of formative conversation is pulling away from that almost interrogation style of communication. Yeah. But young men aren't always the most forthright with how they're feeling. Is there any way when you can, as a parent, tell when something's not right with their kid, even when they're sort of trying to hold back and not really show much?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity for parents to guess. You know, you can say, I wonder if you're feeling really worried about this. And often your son will set you straight, you know, like, no, I'm not worried. I'm cross, or, you know. I think it's okay to sort of to guess and try and, you know, facilitate that conversation. Yeah, I would obviously avoid telling your son, I can tell you're cross, you know, when actually he might be feeling sad and masking it with anger. But yeah, if you say, like, I wonder if you're feeling this, or it looks to me like you're feeling that, and then, you know, leave that space for them to correct you.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'd like to return to this concept of, you know, jobs and skills. And, you know, Jum, how do you encourage a young man to sort of engage with, you know, various stimuli essentially to start developing the skills that they need for the future?
They have to obviously go outside their comfort zone and try things, try, and just try and get as much experience across a broad area as possible. You know, you can start to pull some of on reflection, I'm sure that they can start to pull and articulate when they did show some leadership, whether it be on the sporting field, whether it be in drama class, or whether it be at a part-time job. When did they have to work together and collaborate with a team for a successful outcome? Again, you can pull that from so many different spaces to articulate that. Communication, we've talked about being key. We're talking about interpersonal skills. We're talking about you know, how do we communicate? How can we tell our story? That kind of thing. We're looking at resilience and adaptability to change. You know, the challenge of going from school to university, or deciding what course to take. You know, that is huge amount of change that goes on in a young person's life. If you talked about the emotions that are associated with that, how do we find strategies to help ourselves and others through that sort of period of change? Could it be around customer focus? Again, part-time jobs are great for doing that. And it doesn't matter what kind of job it is. We're looking at developing these skills and being put in a position where we can build these skills, because they're not just going to be built overnight. Like anything you want to get good at, it takes practice. And so putting yourself in these positions to do that is going to help. And we said earlier, you know, just having conversations around the dinner table helps.
Absolutely. And I know from my experience, I've spent this year applying for graduate working positions for next year. And they're very extensive application and interview processes. And they like to understand, you know, what all of your background is. And it's difficult when you're applying for a job. I was applying for a job in management consulting. And, you know, the interviewer was asking me, so what's your experience in management consulting? And I'm like, well,
none.
But then I sat back and I thought about it a bit more extensively, and I realised I've built a lot of skills throughout the past few years since leaving school. And my part-time job has been a great source of learning those skills, even though they're not directly related. My part-time job is as a coach, but the skills that I've learned from that in terms of communication and leadership and organisation, the same key skills that you were mentioning earlier, they're the ones that I'm refining through that process in part-time work. And that set me up for, you know, something that's more relevant in my sort of career-based field. Even though when I was doing this work, it was, you know, sort of the money and enjoyment part of it more than developing my future.
So the different variety of capabilities that you can call on and pull on for those job interviews for graduate roles, you know, CV in a graduate role doesn't mean much. It is a really big process to go through for graduate roles. There's a number of steps, from application process to psychometric testing to video interviews to assessment centres to interviews. It's a very difficult process. But if you can articulate some of these capabilities they're looking for from a wide range of experiences, whether it be sporting team, whether it be a part-time job, the more you can pull on, the better it's going to be for the employers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a really relevant question to that come in. And it's around, why is it important for my son to get a job and or do an internship?
To build these skills.
Yeah.
We keep going back to the skills that employers want to see. And I can tell you for young people entering the workforce, 90 plus % of organisations are looking for the same skills.
And they're not looking for an ATAR.
No, less and less. I can tell you right now, they don't care about your CV or your interscore or your degree type. It's become less and less relevant to them, but these skills are what is at the top of the list.
So, and my hope is that could be quite reassuring for some boys who are disappointed with their ATAR or feel like they've sort of not achieved as well as they would have liked to with their ATAR. But you're telling us that, it's almost beside the point.
I actually probably couldn't tell you what my exact ATAR score was. I know it's a few years ago now, but I couldn't tell you what any of my mates got, what I got. It becomes less and less important. And I think if we can frame that up to our young men and show them that it's not the be all and end all around your career success or what you do with your life after school, then hopefully it puts them in a much better mindset.
Yeah, I can absolutely attest that since the morning when that ATAR result came in on an SMS on my phone, I've never thought it or seen about it again. So it goes away straight away, and it's certainly not a determinant of what's going to happen in a young man's future. I like to sort of pull out to yet another different theme, and I'd like to sort of swing over to you, Nick, a little bit. And the focus with this really is around social life. And often a lot of boys leave Scotch with a really interconnected social group. How can they sort of best maintain that whilst then also encouraging that diversity of friendship as they engage through the different stages of their life?
That's a good question. I think being open to new experiences, like we were talking about with employment or work, all sorts of things. I think where there's opportunity to meet new people and learn from new people, then that should be something that boys sort of pursue rather than just staying with their mates from high school. Because I think if you do because that's comfortable and easy, but after a certain amount of time, that starts to become something that sort of holds you back if your only sort of social network is the boys that you went to school with. Is that your experience, John?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that, why is one friendship better than another friendship in this, and the wider friendship group that you can have from different backgrounds, from, we talk about, having a network. The wider your network, the better it's going to be for you. So encouraging them to, go out of their comfort zone, make new friends, which is difficult at any age to make new friends, but it's beneficial for the long term.
It's interesting, this, the concept of a comfort zone. And certainly once you leave school, there's a very new world that you're stepping into, and it can challenge a lot of comfort zones. And one of the biggest challenges to one's comfort zone is the sort of increased prevalence of substance abuse. And this is quite a serious area, but it's still something that's really important to engage with. And how does a parent best tackle the topic of recreational drugs with their kid without sounding like they're sort of giving a boring lecture?
Yeah, I think, like we said before, try to have those conversations as sort of often as is appropriate, and they may be very short, like 1 or 2 interactions. But I think, I think it's important that these things are talked about, because recreational drug use can quickly become problematic, and often it's when there's sort of like a plausible deniability. Parents sort of think, all my son's friends are doing this, but my son's not, which that's not the case. Yeah, if his mates are doing it, your son's doing it as well. And it is important that you have these conversations with him about the risks without sort of catastrophizing or being too dramatic about it. It's about looking after yourself, taking care, that sort of thing. Yeah,
absolutely. And a lot of that sounds good decision making from young people. And that's not often the easiest task for a young man to do, particularly in social settings. How can you encourage someone to be making the good decisions, the right decisions, even when it's difficult to?
Yeah, I think there's still room for parents to facilitate when their son's making a good decision. You're really, really helpful, about that in terms of, I don't know, picking them up, dropping them off, giving them some extra spending money if they're doing something that's less dangerous than if, they want to do something that's less desirable, then you're unhelpful. You're not going to drop them off. You're not going to pick them up. You're not going to sort of...
so celebrating those good behaviours almost.
Yeah, and reinforcing them in ways that parents can, yeah.
Subtle ways.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And returning to something that you said just before, and that's around, essentially like your peer network and behaviours being reflected, in one's friends and themselves. But how does a boy then support his friends who might not be going down exactly the most desirable path? How can they sort of be best equipped with skills to stick to the right path and help their friends through that?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I think if your son's concerned about his mates, it's the same sort of thing as what I was saying for the parents, conversations, trying to include them in things that are not the drug use or whatever it might be. And as long as it's coming from a place of, that you care about them and that you want to, protect them from what they see is risky or dangerous behaviour. Yeah, I think that's really it's an important thing for people of all ages to be doing for their mates. Yeah. Did you have any other ideas, John?
I think just sort of, we talk about self-awareness, but we talk about that awareness of others, and if we can start to understand others better, and hopefully they're understanding their friends and maybe what some of their drivers and motivators are and who their support network is, and being a sounding board for them, I think just trying to understand them and is going to be really important as well.
So as we sort of start to pull towards the close of this session, I think it's important to look a bit more holistically at the overall boy. And Joe, have you got any tips on how a young man can stay really motivated to sort of pursue something that's going to further themselves into their careers and their lives? Like, what's the sort of the best way that they can engage with their future?
I think it's a tricky one, because I think if we all reflect, our drivers and our motivators have changed significantly over time, and they do change throughout our lives when there's important things that are going on, and they will continue to change for our young people as well. I think if there is an opportunity to actually start to understand and become that self-aware around, well, what is it that I really enjoy doing each day? What gets me out of bed in the morning? What is my why? All that kind of thing is really important. I know Simon Sinek, which some people will be aware of, he talks about finding your why and understanding your purpose is a really good one to go and have a look at. I might get Caroline to send that video out after today to sort of look at that, and you're starting to find 5 or 6 reasons or motivators, drivers for them. Is it that they're driven by helping others? Is it that they're driven by working and collaborating with others? Well, what is going to fulfill those drivers and motivators for them is probably a first step for them to understand, well, what do they want to get involved in? Part-time work, volunteering, sporting, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And, I found through my experience that, once I'd found the sort of the passions of what I wanted to pursue, even with that, that sort of day in, day out slog throughout a year, it grinds everyone down, and I'm sure we've all experienced it. And particularly for young men leaving school and going to university, that's quite difficult, because you've suddenly got all of this freedom and independence. And something that I've found to be pretty much universally experienced by young people, say, at university, is time management. And I know that if I don't structure my day really carefully, then I'm going to absolutely blow everything off and do pretty much nothing. If I'm not staying busy and have really strict sort of timelines of when I need to do things, then I'm not going to help myself sort of get through this daily grind of uni assignments and part-time work and all the sort of the various commitments that your life faces. And so that's certainly something important for me, is to one, stay busy, and to two, to really sort of carefully program that all into your day. And Nick, do you sort of have any sort of key tips on how you navigate your way through that day-to-day grind?
Not really that I can think of at the moment. I was going to come back to the one of parents reaching out to the parents of the same sort of cohort, because it is quite a unique time, you know, when your son just finishes high school. And so there is that shared experience, and some people will be sort of having more success than other families. And I think, you know, yeah, to sort of share what's working, what's not amongst the parent group could be really helpful.
Well, I guess it's a time where our young people get that opportunity to start making decisions for themselves. So they get to decide if they're going to do the work, hand the assignment in, get involved in the group project or whatever it is. So maybe just start to share, well, as a parent, what works for you in those times? How do you structure your day? What works for you? And start that discussion so they can sort of see some ways forward, or some different ways to structure their own days.
Absolutely. So in these last couple of minutes, I'm going to spring a question on you two. And
Good.
You won't be prepared for it, so I'm going to take the bullet first and let you two have a moment to think. And it's an interesting question. What do you wish your parents had asked you in your first year after school? And I know that for me, with no blame going to my parents in case they somehow see this, I wish there was a greater emphasis put into what I genuinely want to do. That's a question that's often thrown around, particularly to Year 12 students, being like, oh, you know, what do you want to do in your next year? And often you give some throwaway response, much like the how are you good scenario.
Yep.
And I think it probably would have been important for me to have sat down for a little bit longer and to put a more concerted effort into really answering that question well, because that's the main thing that was missing out of my life in the first 2 years out of school, is I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'd never really stopped to think about it. So, you know, again, not to blame my parents, but I think if that was asked, perhaps in, you know, a more considered manner, then perhaps I would have come to that clearer decision about what I'm passionate about a little bit earlier. So, over to you two.
Good luck, Nick. You can go first.
You're taking it.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine is similar. I think I would have liked my parents to ask what they could have done to support me, you know. Like, I felt like at that time I did know what I wanted to do, even though it's changed. But I didn't really know how to go about it. And I think that if they had sort of asked me, how can we help, or something like that. Yeah, because there is this sort of notion that Year 12's a real grind and then life's easy. But that's not really the experience for school leavers. And sometimes I think my parents fell into that. They believed that as well. They were like, oh, he's 18, he's finished school, how good, you know, I'll just leave him alone.
Yeah. Definitely resonate that with, and I'm sure many people really do. John?
I would say that, rather than a question, so to speak, I'd say that they probably took a real interest in what I was doing and day to day, and created that environment to probably share and talk about it more. I was living out of home, straight out of school, so they probably didn't see me day to day, so taking that real interest in it. And now what would I do for my next ones? I'd put my kids, they're a long way off finishing school. I haven't even started school yet. But when they get there, I think regular check-ins around maybe talking about, are you fulfilled? Is your cup full? And you know, that takes a lot of self-awareness from your child to acknowledge whether it is or it isn't. And if it isn't, well, how can we help you fill it? You know,
Yeah.
How can we fill your days with your passions and what you love doing? Because that's obviously really important.
Absolutely. You know, so almost really all three have come to quite a neat theme there at the end. So that was all the questions we're going to get to tonight. And I'd just like to wrap up a little bit. So firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for your questions and for sitting around and listening. This discussion will hopefully really help you and your boys throughout the next stage of their life. And the effort that you've gone to tonight to help support your boys is a great sign. So thank you and good luck in the next steps with your sons. We will be providing you with some resources following this. And so hopefully they provide some help in the next steps. We will be sending out a quick survey about tonight, and we'll greatly benefit from you having a quick look at that. Now, one of the first steps that you can encourage your sons to do is to find us on social media. Both Oscar and the YOBs are on Facebook and Instagram, which will help them stay connected. And we also have a really great podcast with some interesting and diverse stories. Most recently we've featured Tom Batty, but previously we've had AFL players or people following political careers, or even stories about moving out and what sort of the next stage of life is really like. So, encourage them to connect with us on that way. Thank you all for listening tonight. Thank you, Nick and John, and have a good night.